I got hospitalized for exhaustion. My family knew, and still the only message I got was, "Can you send me $300?" I sent nothing, and within hours everything in our family dynamic cracked. I fell to the floor right in the middle of class. I didn't trip, I didn't lose my balance. I just turned off like an old TV that had been unplugged. The white ceiling, the smell of antiseptic, the nurse checking my pulse, and my phone in a clear bag on the chair. That's the whole picture of my beautiful morning. The kids in the hallway were probably already arguing over who would take my favorite set of picture cards. It was always a prize for successful lessons. The room is quiet. Only the equipment makes a steady beeping sound. I write a short message to my family. In the hospital. Dehydration, exhaustion, overnight observation. For words to signify that I am now lying under an 4 and not say driving or shopping. 1 hour silence. 2nd hour silence. On the 3rd comes a text from Robert. Can you pay for my car repairs? It's urgent. Not even a "how are you?" Amazingly, people seem to have a built-in filter for empathy when it comes to someone who's been bailing them out their whole life. The 4 drips measuredly. The doctor talks about overwork, lack of sleep, normal diet. Yes, doctor, tell me something else I didn't know. I nod. The habit of agreeing has remained from my school years. In my head, I do the bookkeeping, the vacations given for family repairs, the savings that went to other people's loans, the health that evaporated between morning calls and evening part-time jobs. If I had been paid for every year strong, I would not be in this room right now, but on a beach somewhere in Portugal. A picture from my childhood comes to mind. I'm 10. My mom, Helen, is holding her head. I have a migraine. You're an adult, put Robert down. I, still afraid of the dark myself, carry him in my arms, warming his bottle, whispering that everything is okay. That adult sounded like a medal then, but it turned out to be shackles. Sometimes I think I signed a contract that day that no one saw. 14 years old. Friends call me to the lake. Mom smiles tiredly. Help, I don't feel well and Robert is cranky. I text a friend. It won't work. Dad, Charles, peeks into the kitchen. You can do it. And walks off to the garage. He always said it like he was handing me a certificate of honor, not another night without rest. In the evening I do the dishes, check my brother's homework, and fall asleep without even remembering that it was my birthday. Holidays in our family are when Mom doesn't have a fit, Dad doesn't have a grudge, and Robert doesn't have debt. 17. First paycheck from a part-time job. It's already spread out. For electricity, for medicine, for a new blender because the old one is noisy. Charles pronounces. A family is a boat. Hold the oar. And I do until my hands go numb. And the funny thing is, no one even thinks to ask if I even want to be in this boat. The morning after discharge. My phone vibrates like a hornet's nest in my pocket. Pay the light bill. The mechanic is waiting for a transfer. I need a new kettle. Not a single. How are you feeling? I open the notes and write. They're not interested in me. Only my bill. Sometimes I think if my bank account could talk, it would be this family's favorite. The day at school passes like a blur. Kids are stretching their arms, making sounds, learning to speak so they can be heard. And I think, who's going to teach me to speak if I've only nodded my whole life? At recess I drink tea, looking out the window, and for the first time I catch myself not wanting to answer the phone. Perhaps silence is also a form of speech, it's just that no one taught it to me. In the evening I turn off my phone and for the first time in a long time I fall asleep without those endless vibrations. It's raining outside the window, and I think that maybe it's the only thing that's irrigating my life on its own right now. But there's already a thought buzzing inside that there's no escape from. Something's broken, and fixing it probably isn't worth it. And damn it, there's a strange but satisfying sense of freedom in that admission. At night I'm awakened by a noise in the hallway. Someone wheeling a gurney in, the wheels squeaking like an old swing. I lie there and think that maybe these people here really need someone. And I catch myself envying the patient in the next room, whose husband comes every hour with a thermos of soup. He takes off the lid, tastes it with a spoon, blows so as not to burn it. In our family, you could only get soup if you made it yourself. I recall making chicken broth for Helen when she was 12 because she was having a bad day. Charles was sitting in front of the TV at the time and Robert was crying in the room. I held the lid of the pot while the steam billowed in my face and thought that probably all families live like that, some working and others vacationing at their expense. That belief held until this morning. In the morning, still in the ward, I look at my phone, 14 unread messages. Not one of them begins with the words, "How are you?" But there are exact amounts, deadlines, and requests phrased as if I were their personal bank. The word urgent is repeated 3 times. If they gave me an award for that, I'd have a gold trophy for Sponsor of the Year. When I'm discharged, I walk to my car slowly, as if I'm checking to see if I even have the strength to move into the world where I'll be torn apart again. The rain whips across the hood, and I wonder if at least he's not asking me for money. In the evening, I made myself tea in a cracked mug, the only one I still have from college. I was the only one who liked that mug, so it was on the top shelf at my parents' house where no one touched it. I look at it and realize I deserve a mug that I like. Even if it's cracked. Even if it's the only one. My phone keeps flashing, but I no longer automatically reach for it. At some point I realize that the silence in the apartment sounds louder than any rebuke from Helen. And frankly, I like it. It's a silence in which there are no debts, no complaints, and the eternal, "You'll get over it." It's just me, the rain, and a cracked mug. Before I go to bed, I open my notebook and start writing what I can't say out loud. The first line comes out by itself. I didn't leave my family. I came back to myself. Then there's a list of things I did for myself today. Drank my tea, didn't answer the phone, looked out the window for longer than 5 minutes. It's funny, but it already feels like a victory. I turn off the light and think that maybe this day will become a point of reference. Not because I changed the whole world, but because for the first time I decided not to save those who didn't even ask how I was. The morning began with Robert texting, "Drop it on the insurance, I have a deadline tomorrow." I read the message 3 times, hoping something like, "How are you feeling since the hospital?" would slip between the lines. But no, just numbers and the word urgent, like the password that unlocks my wallet. This time I wrote 2 words, "I can't." Less than a minute later, the phone rang like a fire siren. Robert yelled that I was selfish, that the family was counting on me, that I was always messing things up when I should have just helped. I listened and thought that just helping was apparently selling a kidney, but without anyone noticing. Then Helen stepped in. Her voice was quiet, teary, like an actress in the 3rd act of a tragedy. "I'm so upset, my heart can't take it," she whispered. "Charles concluded the concert. You've let us down." Just like that, in 3 rings, I managed to feel like both a criminal and a traitor, and the only person still holding this fragile family structure together. At school, the kids tried to pronounce and laughed when they succeeded. And I tried to say no and not apologize. And that proved more difficult than any phonetic exercise. At lunchtime, I sat in the empty teacher's lounge, eating cold soup and thinking that probably a lot of people my age are afraid of getting old. And I dread the next call from my family. In the evening, Charles called. His voice was not accusatory but agitated. "If you want to see her alive, come over. Now." Those words hit the oldest nerve, the one that had been quivering since childhood. I grabbed my jacket, keys, and first aid kit. It was raining so hard the windshield wipers could barely keep up, but I drove like my life depended on my speed. Helen opened the door. She was pale, with a blanket around her shoulders, and the room smelled of peppermint and medicine. She looked at me as if I had just returned from the war. "Daughter, I'm sorry," she whispered and squeezed my hand. I felt everything soften inside. It almost felt like caring. Almost. For the next 2 hours, I made soup, ordered medication, paid for a new washing machine because the old one rattles like a dying tractor, and made a to-do list for the week. Robert came in, picked up a bag of food, said, "Thank you," and left. Charles appeared in the doorway like a shadow and said his eternal, "You'll do fine." I nodded because it was easier than explaining that I didn't even have the strength for my own life. I slept on the couch in the living room. The rain drummed on the roof, the washing machine hummed in the next room, and I felt like a dispatcher in a chaos control center. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized I was back in the role I had escaped from just a week before. When I returned to school the next day, a coworker in the office next door asked why I looked like I'd spent the night at the train station. I grinned and replied that at least the train station didn't call every 10 minutes with new demands. She didn't get the joke but offered me coffee. I accepted. Coffee from strangers somehow warms up better than words from family. After class, I went to the store to get groceries for Helen. It was funny how automatically my basket was filled with their favorite things: Earl Grey tea for Charles, cookies with nuts for Robert, and only in the very corner a packet of macaroni for me. The habit of taking care of them is so built in that I sometimes think, if they disappear, I'll be standing in an empty store not knowing what to buy. When I returned, Helen was already in bed, reading a magazine and looking much more awake than she had the day before. "Did you get that yogurt I like?" she asked, as if I were a delivery boy. I set the bag on the table and noticed Charles fiddling with the TV and Robert texting on his phone. Neither of them offered me a seat, neither asked me how my day was going. It rained again in the evening, and I caught myself listening to it with relief. At least this sound is honest. It's pouring because it's pouring, not to make me feel guilty. But with each passing minute, the feeling of being trapped again came over me. I remembered lying in the hospital a week ago, and feeling like this could be the beginning of a new life. And now I was back in the role of dispatcher of other people's problems. Helen asked me to stay a couple more days, just in case. I nodded because I didn't want to make a scene, but I was growing irritated inside. I knew that just in case meant indefinitely. Robert had already started making a list of things he should buy, and Charles was talking about the roof repair as if I had to pay for it in the crew. Late at night, I lay on the couch and thought that maybe this was my own personal hell. The same people, the same lines, the same tiredness, only the scenery changes from hospital to living room. And the worst part is that part of me still hopes they'll ever say, "Thank you." On the third day of helping, I woke up to a knock on the door. It was the neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, with a container of homemade pie. She said, "Saw you running back and forth, thought maybe you were human too and needed to eat." I laughed, but something prickled inside. The stranger had noticed my tiredness faster than my own mother. When I went back inside, Helen asked me to go through the medicine cabinet. There were so many expired pills that I wondered if I should open a museum of medicines. In between, Charles reminded me to call the bank about Robert's loan because you're a better negotiator. Robert, without taking his eyes off the phone, added, "And make the payment at the same time, okay?" As if I were their financial manager. In the evening I tried to talk. I sat down across from Helen and told her I was tired and needed to go home. She stopped talking, looked at me like I had just offered to sell the house, and said, "Do you want to leave us like this?" Charles sighed so heavily that he seemed to want me to apologize. Robert just walked out of the room. And so I was alone again on this stage where the role of ruthless villain fell to me. I didn't sleep at night. I listened to the water dripping from the faucet and thought that perhaps the leak in the pipes and the leak of my life were similar, slow but inevitable. I felt each day some more crash into me like a stone into soft earth. And the longer I'm here, the deeper this funnel gets. Toward morning, I realized that the conversation about my leaving was inevitable. I didn't know exactly how it would go, but I knew for sure it would. Because even the most patient person, if trapped long enough, will start looking for a way out. The morning began with me going out for bread and coming back with a truth I had not asked for. Mrs. Fletcher was standing at the gate with a bag of apples. She smiled and said, "Saw your mom at the supermarket on Friday, so chipper, wearing makeup, laughing with the cashier." I froze because on Friday I'd rushed here in the rain, ready to see Helen dying. My neighbor's words stuck in my head like gum on the soles of my feet. It seemed like a small thing, but every step was sticky. I walked into the house, put the bread on the table, and then Robert's voice came from the kitchen. Mom could have been an actress. He said it like he was praising her cooking talent. I felt my insides fall back into place. The play was over, no applause required. I didn't make a scene. There was no point. I just went to my room, grabbed my bag, my charger, my notepad, and the first aid kit I'd brought in case. In the hallway, Charles asked, "Where are you going?" "Home," I replied. Helen called out from the bedroom, "Daughter." But I was already opening the door. Outside, I smelled wet asphalt and fresh air. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without permission. On the way home, I stopped by the bank and turned off all auto payments to their accounts. Then I changed my password in online banking. Purely technically, it took about 15 minutes, but inside it felt like crossing a border. In the evening, I sat on the floor of my apartment, among the boxes, thinking that I had nothing extra. No furniture, no bulky appliances, no other people's debts. I made tea in my cracked mug and felt like this was my home for the first time in a long time. The messages came one after another. First, reproaches. You betrayed us. You left your mother. You ruined everything. Then suggestions. Come back. Let's talk. We need you. Then there were the pictures of Helen looking like she was in a disaster commercial. I looked at them and realized I didn't want to be on this show anymore. On the third day of silence, I woke up and realized I didn't have an anxious pulse from the sound of the phone. I took a different route to school, walked into my classroom and rearranged my desk the way I was comfortable. At recess, I wrote in my notebook, 1 day a week, just my business. That phrase seemed like a luxury to me. In the evening, I opened the window and listened to the rain. For the first time, that sound wasn't the background to someone else's requests. It was just the rain. And in that silence, I heard my own voice, quiet but real. When I got home, I realized I didn't know what to fill an evening without someone else's task list. No, pick up a prescription at the doctor's office, pay the electric bill, buy a water filter. The emptiness seemed unsettling at first, but then it found room to breathe. I pulled out the book I bought a year ago and read 3 chapters in a row. No one interrupted, no one called, no one sent a text marked urgent. The next day I went to the hardware store. Not for a washing machine for Helen, not for tools to repair the roof, but for a small shelving unit for books. The salesman asked, "Do you need help carrying it?" And I was about to say, "No, I can manage." But then I smiled and said, "Yes, thank you." It turned out that allowing yourself to help is a separate kind of freedom. In the evening, a coworker called me and suggested we meet for coffee on Saturday. Before, I would have canceled because my mom isn't feeling well, or my brother is in trouble. Now I said yes and felt this simple arrangement fill me with something warm and real. The messages from the family kept coming. Sometimes I read them for statistics. How many times they mentioned the word duty or betrayal in a week. The record was held by Charles's message. Family is when you sacrifice yourself, even if you don't want to. I didn't respond because I realized, if I started explaining, I'd end up back in their script. I noticed that I had stopped waking up in the middle of the night from my alarm. Now all that woke me up was the light coming through the curtains and the sound of rain. Sometimes I would go out on the balcony and just stand there listening to the city. No one demanded that I go back to the house, where all conversations ended with a to-do list. One day I was walking down the street and saw my reflection in a shop window. Not tired, not irritated, but calm. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I saw myself like that. And that was more important than any apology I might never hear. I started carrying around a notebook and writing down small victories, had coffee alone in a cafe, bought flowers for no reason, turned my phone off for the evening. These notes seemed like little things, but they added up to something bigger, a life with me in it. On the last Friday of the month, I came home from work and put the kettle on. I remembered that before, at this point, I would have run on someone else's errand. Now I could afford to just wait for the water to boil. And there was more meaning in that waiting than in all the years of endless chasing after other people's wishes. This weekend I went to the park. Not to walk Robert when he was a baby, not to take Helen for another therapeutic walk, but just for fun. I walked slowly, looking at the trees, listening to the gravel crunching under my feet. An elderly couple was sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons and laughing about something of their own. I caught myself smiling at them like old friends, even though we had never met. At home, I decided to make dinner, not soup for a sick man, not a casserole for a tired father, but pasta with the kind of sauce I like. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the kitchen, and it seemed to me that for the first time the walls of this apartment were absorbing my life rather than the echoes of other people's conversations. In the evening, a new message came from Helen. A long text about how hard it was for her, how empty the house was, how she missed our girl. I read it and felt only tiredness. Not the kind that drives you to the hospital, but the kind that makes you realize that you can't go back there. I closed the screen and went to do the dishes. Sometimes the best answer is silence. The next day at school, one of my students brought me a drawing of us standing under an umbrella with the caption, "Thank you." I hung it on my desk. It was a reminder that true gratitude does not require conditions or return. In the evening, I opened the window again, and the rain pounded on the sill. I remembered everything. The calls, the recriminations, the plays, the scheduled tears. And realized that now it's all like an old movie I've watched too many times. It no longer evokes emotion, other than mild surprise that I once thought it was real. I don't know what the future holds, But I do know this. I don't have to go back to someone else's set to make someone else comfortable. I have my crack mug, my routes, my little victories. And that's enough to make me feel alive.